Hi everyone, this is Dr. Essie Stacey, helping you to be well. Hi everyone. So I'm just waiting for people to join in. Essie Stacey, helping you to be. Hi everyone, this is Dr. Essie Stacey, helping you to be well. Essie Stacey, helping you. Hi everyone, this is Dr. Essie Stacey, helping you to be well. Essie Stacey, helping you. Right, I'm hoping I'm on. No, every time I talk something's happening. Hi everyone, this is Dr. Essie Stacey, helping you to be well. Essie Stacey, helping you. Right, I'm hoping I'm on. No, every time I talk something's happening. Hi everyone, this is Dr. Essie Stacey, helping you to be well. Essie Stacey, helping you. Right, I'm hoping I'm on. No, every time I talk something's happening. So before we start on the recap, I like this quote from Thomas Edison, who says that the doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will instruct his patient in the care of the human frame, in diet, and the cause and prevention of disease. And I think that's where we're at right now. We know that medicines don't do everything. They can be very helpful, but they don't do everything. And what I'm seeing is that in this increasingly toxic environment, we need other answers. The medicines aren't the whole answer. And so just recapping, you remember that the medicine of today treats our body as if we were a car with things that go wrong in it. So the headlights go wrong, you change that. If the tire goes flat, you sort that out. If there's black smoke coming from the exhaust, you look at the engine a little bit. But these are my kids and they don't look like cars to me. And the point I was making there was that my kids were sick. The reason I've arrived at this point where I am is because of having to help my children. And when Hannah was little, this picture of her, let me just move my little head thing out of the way. When she was little, she had, you can see this is her and her little friend Zach, both with Down syndrome. They both look tired, huh? And the red cheeks, the rosy cheeks, it's a feature of kids with Down syndrome. And in fact, this is where I first began to understand that those rosy cheeks are to do with the gut. If you look carefully, you might see a little bit of a bloated tummy under there. And so the gut is related to skin issues. And the Down syndrome, let me stick this back over here. With Down syndrome, you can't treat a kid with Down syndrome as if they're a car, because there's issues, there's growth issues, runny nose, red cheeks and skin, bloated tummy, brain and learning, vitamin and mineral problems, thyroid problems, and some unfortunate kids would have leukemias as well. So in that search from the car, it took me to the gut. It took me to the gut. And then I was led to think, well, why does everyone have a bad gut? Because when I started bringing this knowledge from the kids with Down syndrome, my children, into my practice as a sports doctor, I began to find gut issues in a lot of patients who have chronic musculoskeletal problems, muscle aches and pains, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, that type of thing. And I then start to think, well, why has everyone got a bad gut? It seems to be very common. And that's when I came up with the hierarchy of health. And the hierarchy of health starts with you and your DNA shining brightly in the universe. And then along come the toxins in our environment, which affect the DNA, but they also affect the gut. This is the green layer, is the gut layer. The toxins is where it starts. Toxins affecting the DNA, affecting the gut, is where illnesses start. And if we can grasp how to deal with these illnesses, then we can deal with the other layers that come after that. So when the gut is affected, we know that the gut is an immune organ. And when that's affected, then you start to have immune issues. This is the immunity layer. And that is to do with inflammation. We know that chronic inflammation is the cause of almost all diseases. Inflammation, infection, low-grade infection. The immunity layer is also about tumors, cell turnover. The gut is responsible for keeping the inflammation low. But if you are battling in this area with inflammation problems, infection problems, immune problems, the body starts to run out of resources. The body will try and keep this inflammation low by using up its resources, things like Vit D, things like, say, magnesium, things like minerals, things like your adrenals, your thyroid. So I call this layer the deficiency layer. And the body's going to try, you've got this inflammation going on, you've got the body trying to deal with that by using up its resources, and it will do that. So if you take vitamins and minerals, etc., it's going to help you reduce your inflammation, but it's not going to necessarily help you deal with these layers, these inner layers. But it's not a wrong thing to do that. But if you, after a while, the body runs out of resources, and that's when you get the next layer, which is I call it the symptom layer. But the symptom layer is where you develop something that us doctors can diagnose. That might be cancer, it might be diabetes mellitus, that is. It might be osteoporosis. It might be some kind of dementia. So that layer is when we would go to the doctor and say, I'm feeling ill, and the doctor diagnoses you with something. And what I'm saying is, if we can grasp what's going on in the layers before, then we can help ourselves to be well. And so going over those layers again, I call the hierarchy of hell, really. The toxins, what types of toxins are, and that's what today is about. But there's things like the mycotoxins, which are the mold toxins, different chemical toxins, heavy metals. MES is mental, emotional, spiritual, and EMF is electromagnetic frequencies. Yes, things that are coming off the Wi-Fi, things that are coming off electricity. These are unseen, but they have an effect, a toxic effect on us. What affects the gut? Sugars, refined sugars, we know that. Exhaustive exercise, so exercise that just whacks you out completely, will have a detrimental effect on the gut. Good exercise that peps you up and you feel great will enhance gut function. Electromagnetic frequency affects the gut microbes. There's studies that show it. Nutrients, so poor nutrients, things like trans fats will have an adverse effect. And also thoughts. We know that there's a gut-brain axis. We know that when we're anxious, the tummy goes. So there's this axis, this interaction between what's going on in our minds and our thoughts and our guts also. That immunity layer, remember the red layer, is to do with inflammation, cell turnover. That's the immune cells are responsible for keeping cancers away from us as well. And the immune cells are responsible for dealing with infections. Remember, the body then tries to keep the inflammation low by using its resources such as Vit D, thyroid, adrenal gland, Vit C, Q10, NAC, that's N-acetylcysteine, which is very similar to Vit C, and your B-Vits. My head's in the way again. The B-Vits. And then the symptom layer is when you develop your symptom. That can be whatever. This is metabolic syndrome, which is like cholesterol, high blood pressure, being overweight, polycystic ovaries, that type of thing. Then the CA is cancer, mind issues, mood, brain fog, memory issues, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, chronic joint problems that are not getting better, or aches and pains, respiratory problems. Whatever you want to diagnose, that's going to go in that symptom layer. And then what about the hierarchy of wealth? How do we get back to wellness? So we take these layers. We take the first layer, the toxin layer, and we remove the toxins. The gut layer, we heal the gut. You can remove the toxins, but you still need to heal the gut. You need to get the gut back to its normal health, where it's not letting stuff come through that then activates the immune system. So you support the immune system with good food, fermented food, sometimes supplements. Deficiency, you can replace the deficient vitamins if necessary. Not always necessary if you deal with those other layers. And then with the symptoms, you might target that system as well if necessary. So you're not pushing necessarily conventional medicine completely out of the way, but what you're saying is that deal with these layers. Deal with these layers, and the other layers I'm going to deal with themselves. And that's where I got my diet to detox program from. Phase 1 and phase 2, this kind of overlap, is where you remove the toxins and you heal the gut. You do that first. And in fact, the body starts to get rid of the toxins itself, because toxins, they become attached to the DNA, they sit in the tissues, etc. So the phase 1 is removing the toxins that you are intentionally kind of putting into your body. So in your food, in your environment, you stop doing that to your body, and you begin to heal the gut as well. You with that leaky gut where there are holes, effectively, you tighten all of that up. And then in phase 3, you then target the toxins that are actually in the tissues to try and get rid of them. But in fact, what happens is, if you do these 2 layers properly, the body starts to do this on its own. And I think that's quite a good place to stop for the recap. You tighten all of that up, and then in phase 3, you then target the toxins that are actually in the tissues to try and get rid of them. But in fact, what happens is, if you do these 2 layers properly, the body starts to do this on its own. And I think that's quite a good place to stop for the recap. You tighten all
Hi
of that
everyone. I'm
up.
not.
And then in phase 3, you then target the toxins that are actually in.
Okay, I think I am back, just me, um, with my technical issues. So I'm still trying to get used to the software. Um, and for some reason that was playing from my iPad. Who knows why? Um, but hopefully I brought you all up to speed. That was the recap of Hierarchy of Health the first time around. So if you have any questions, I'm not sure of the people that have joined up whether this is your first time. Any questions about Hierarchy of Health? The first, just the overall kind of picture. Do type in on into the comment bit. There's a tiny bit of a delay for me, so I'm trying to sort of manage that and get used to that as well. But I'm hoping that most people have understood my my wheels within wheels. And really, that's the crux of it, is that if you can understand that it's about the toxins and the DNA and the effect that has also on the gut, that for me, that's where all ill health begins, is those inner two layers. And so if we can grasp that those layers are, the important ones, then we can begin to understand how to unravel that and get better again. So thanks, Sue. I've got that one. Looking at your mental, emotional issues, mental, emotional, spiritual issues. That is what Sue's gonna be dealing with as well when she comes and joins me on the webinars, because what I feel is that we can't just, and a lot of this talk today does deal with some of that. We can't just deal with the physical side. We have to deal with both. So I've got Subrachi who's going to come along. I've got Dr. Stephen Brook who's going to talk about the heart as well, and maybe one other person as well. So we've got a whole team of us who are going to really help us to put ourselves back together. So I'm hoping that my technical abilities are okay. So I've basically got this into a few sections. So the first bit, it's how many sections? I've got 4. So we've done 1, and we're going to just do all of these in sections. And if you've got any questions whilst I'm giving the presentation bit, then just pop your questions in the box and I'll answer them at the end of each section. So let's have a look and see whether this is going to work. So if we want to look at toxins, we can't leave out water. And so I just want to start with a quote from Paracelsus. He made this quote in the 16th century. He was a physician, an alchemist, used chemicals, and a mystic, as you could be in those days. He's said to be the father of chemistry and the father of toxicology. He wrote one of the first papers looking at miners and the diseases that miners got from toxins. And he espoused the looking at where toxins rested or accumulated in the body, the target organ toxicity, and people thought he was crazy. He died an unhappy, frustrated man. He got chucked out of his professor post in the University of Basel in Germany because of his ideas. He's a contemporary of Leonardo da Vinci. And he would say that the mind, the will, the soul, the spirit can influence the state of the body and can cause or cure a disorder. He said, there is nothing in heaven and on earth which is not in man. And God, who is in heaven,
is in man. He's basically telling us to use what is within us to heal. That was Paracelsus. And so what has that got to do with water? Well, Leonardo da Vinci said that water is the vehicle of nature. Paracelsus says that water is the matrix of the world and all its creatures. So that was 16th century wisdom. Now, I went to the water conference in last year, in October 2019, and Luc Montagnier, who was one of the discoverers of HIV virus, and he got a Nobel Prize for that. When he shifted his attention to water, he was vilified for it. Suddenly, he was crazy, a bit like Paracelsus. But he said water is part of our DNA structure. To transmit information, you need water. And so we can't we can't deal with toxins unless we understand water. And many of you will be aware of this diagram, which looks at how we, with our own genetics, interact with gut microbes. And that sort of that link between the two is called epigenetics. Anything that creates good microbial environment, a gut environment, will have a knock-on effect on our genes, will switch on good genes. Anything that has a bad effect on our gut microbial environment will switch off our genes. And because there's 10 times more genetic material in the gut than we have in our bodies, there's more of them than us. They have a massive effect on our health. And so what we should be thinking of more is perhaps this way of thinking with the matrix, with the DNA in the middle. And then this is, if you think about the blue as the cell, most of us think, and we're kind of taught in biology, that the DNA is in the nucleus, it's in the middle of the cell, and it's kind of floating around in the cellular water, like being at sea kind of thing. But in fact, when we look at the water in our cells, I'm not drawing it properly, obviously, it's highly organized, highly structured in nature. It's not, the water is almost like a gel-like consistency. It's said to be a crystal, a liquid crystal, and it has polarity. H2O is neutral, but in our cells and when it's in the body, it acts like a dipole. It has a positive end and a negative end, like a magnet. And the twisting of the DNA is twisted because of this magnetic effect. It twists it because of if you put two positive ends of a magnet together, they won't go, will they? They cause a change in the environment. That's what happens with the DNA. So it's highly structured, highly organized in the cell. It's not like stuff wishing around like that. So can you imagine just sticking a big bit of metal in there, a big bit of rubbish in there? Surely that is going to alter the charge, the delicate charges, highly structured charges. And this is what toxins are doing. Toxins are doing in our bodies. So they're doing that, but they're also, the toxin itself may be attaching itself again via this sort of electromagnetic phenomena to the DNA. So it's important that we understand that that's how the toxins are interacting with, with our cells. Try and find where I am at. So when we look at toxins in general, what do we think of? We might remember that smoking is related to cancers and things like that. Sorry, I'll find where I'm at. There we go. And stuff like asbestos. We know that, if your building's got asbestos in, that's not good. Cancers and all that. Think about lead pipes. lead in paints, even the PCBs and the plastic type things that come off modern paints, toys. We can think about mercury. The term "mad as a hatter" comes because in those days, way back, the guys that made hats, felt hats, apparently the felt rims or something had mercury in them, and so they were touching this mercury the whole time. And mercury gets deposited in your brain and affects brain function. And so this the madness or the sort of the quirkiness of these hatters was due to the mercury. And I remember being in general practice and a lady coming in to see me, and she was a sort of an eclectic type of lady with carrying lots of bags and flowing uh, clothes and slightly unkempt, and she was spitting into in continually spitting into tissues and salivating into the tissues, and I thought, wow, this is a interesting lady. But and she actually said to me, I have mercury poisoning. This is why I keep spitting. I was a young GP at the time. I didn't know anything about toxins. But when I looked it up, there, sure enough, was hypersalivation was one of those symptoms. And so toxins, we tend to sort of think of them as being out there. Um, but what if I said we need to look at toxins in everyday life? So your deodorant is going to have aluminium in them, right? So the vast majority, unless you've chosen one that doesn't, is going to have aluminium in it, and that will go into your body. There's some studies doing on looking at breast milk and finding the stuff that you put under your arms ends up in the breast milk. Cleaning products. So they're so good because they are harsh chemicals, and those chemicals, using them all the time, will end up in your body. And don't get me wrong, using a tiny little bit once is not going to harm. Maybe not even twice, maybe not even 10 times, but it's the accumulation over time, particularly if your body can't get rid of the stuff. And so when these companies do their checks on whether the stuff in their product is harmful, they'll have levels. The government and what have you, the EU, whatever, will give levels that are safe. But what's not done is to say what happens if that tiny little bit, which on its own is not going to harm, is accumulated over time. Not only that, what happens if the stuff that's in the cleaning product is combined with the stuff that's in my deodorant, is combined with the stuff that's in my plastics, that in my bottles and containers, and the non-stick stuff and the nickel that is in stainless steel pans, and it's combined with all of those things. I call it the toxic inflammatory burden. After a while, these toxins accumulate together. It's not just one toxin. We're very much led to think that disease is caused by one thing. We've got to come away from that, because what the pharmaceutical industry want us to think that disease is caused by one thing and I can get a pill for my ill. But disease isn't caused by just one thing. Then what about soaps and shampoos? You get things like silicone in the slippery hand pump soaps and all sorts of chemicals that make those soaps do what they do so well become accumulated in our system. I had a patient with who wore lots of makeup every day. That enters into the skin. The conditioner in the shampoos, it enters into the skin. In our shiny brand new cars, that smell, the smell of the new car, that's a chemical. And that chemical will keep on pumping out for about 3 years. Carpets and curtains, the fibers that are coming off those are often have a petrol derivative. Plastics are from petrol, essentially. And there was one study that looked at fibers, plastic fibers, come off our clothes, come off the curtains, come off what have you, that are in our drinking water. And there's a lot of them. So all of these together on their own, the body might not be so overwhelmed with them. But when you put them all together, then the body begins to struggle. So what about if we look at toxins in the water and in the soil? So we have wastewater companies that clean our water and make it all nice for us to drink. But actually, there are these things that are called micropollutants. And micropollutants, the definition of it is the stuff that the wastewater companies can't get rid of. And so what are these micropollutants? Pesticides, pharmaceuticals. So pharmaceuticals is an interesting one because there's a huge list of them. Things like ibuprofen in there. Things like estrogens. So when I started working in central London, after having a break for a while, I'm a sports doctor, so I have to examine people. I started noticing men with man boobs. And this was not something that they'd done on purpose. This was they had developed boobs, little boobs. And we're taught that is a medical condition called gynecomastia. And at first I was looking for a hormonal problem. Couldn't find it until I was at a conference and someone happened to be telling me about these estrogens in our drinking water. And sometimes they're estrogens, sometimes they're things called endocrine disrupting chemicals, EDCs. And EDCs there might be another chemical which behaves as if it is, for example, an estrogen in the body. So this alerted me initially to the toxins. And my son is a medical student in London, and I went and got some super duper water filter straight away for him because of this. So the pharmaceuticals, they're coming from the pharmaceutical companies from their water. When they're cleaning and stuff like that, that gets washed out. Hospitals, that gets all washed out into down the drain and what have you. Cosmetics and perfumes are in these micropollutants. Flame retardants and things like plasticizers, coatings, insulating foams, you name it, are in the water we drink. And when I'm looking at my patients, it's the same story of toxins that come up all the time. These are pesticides, these are heavy metals, these are molds, and these are petrol derivatives, plastics, if you like. So these are the things I see all the time in people. There may be varying levels depending on the history of that person. If they grew up by fields that were sprayed, then the pesticides might be heavier still. If they, if you're a dentist, then, for example, then you're going to have higher levels of metals in your system. And here's an interesting thing. We pass stuff onto our children through the placenta. And one study showed that, sorry, I skipped a few slides. Let me just go back here. So pesticides, where are we getting them from? Water, food, and maybe maternal through the placenta. Heavy metals, as I said, dentists have a lot, but also if you've got amalgams, if you've got, metal fillings, you're going to have some heavy metals in you. Now, whether or not it's doing harm to you or you're feeling ill effects, put it that way, will depend on your other on the other toxins in your system, whether you detoxify well or not, and your general state of health. Tattoos, so those, the whole world's gone mad putting tattoos on them. But did you know that the metals, the colors are often metallic, and there is this thing called a tattoo burn when you go into an MRI scanner. So an MRI is a magnetic field that's created. Now, if you've got a something that's in a ring shape, a ring like this, and it's metallic, and you've got this electromagnetic field, this ring heats up like that. And so there's this phenomena of tattoo burns from people going in to an MRI scanner, and that's because there's metal in that tattoo. Um, so so where else are we getting that from? Food, water, and again maternal transmission. Molds often from living in a moldy home or eating foods which have been dried and stored. The food itself may be good for you, but if that food has been dried and stored and mold has been allowed to grow on that, the toxins develop in the food. You can get rid of the mold itself, but the toxins that are left will enter the food chain. And the petrol derivatives, as I said, the plastics. And so going back to the slide that I thought I was on, toxins at birth. This one study showed that there were 208 toxins in the cord blood, in that placental blood. 208. And I believe that's increasing. And so we're starting, children are starting with this already, with this toxic burden. And what I'm beginning to see in my clinics is the age of people that are suffering from these chronic conditions is coming down. Something that in the past you'd see a 50-year-old with, you might see a 25-year-old with aches and pains. Get up in the morning, I'm feeling stiff and achy. I'm feeling tired all the time. Those types of things that they seem to be happening younger. And so when we take all that together with the toxins, this is how I've put the hierarchy of health together, is understanding that the toxins affect the DNA. There's this toxin layer, this blue layer that we are subject to in our environment affects the DNA, and it affects our gut, and then we go on and on. So I think that's enough for this section. Good. So I hope that makes sense. I'm just going to go back and answer some of your questions, or just pull out some comments. So Regina said that emotional issues had a big effect on her health, and releasing toxic emotions, I presume that's a therapy, was very helpful, with and essential oils and godly affirmations. I think that's right. I'm going to talk about water some more, as we go on, and because I believe that the intentions, memory, we know that memory is stored in water, and it can be stored as a toxin, if you like, because it then is going to alter the DNA and the way the DNA folds and therefore works. Yes, this so Sue's comment about the mercury in hats, mad as a hatter. And Lisa, I don't think you're mad. You're a lovely mad. But yeah, it was, so I know, Regina, you're worried about let me get that comment up. I can't find it now. You were worried that a friend of yours, that's right, the friend of yours is working with felt. It was the way the felt was processed. It's not the felt itself. It's basically, it was put in a mercury solution to process it afterwards. So it wasn't that the felt itself was because it's a material. It wasn't the felt itself was a problem. It was the processing of it. So I believe it's not processed that way anymore. And I think Paula asked, what is the safest material for saucepans, etc., to cook with? So I mentioned there that things like those non-stick pans are not great, and also and stainless steel pans
as well because of the nickel that leaches out of the stainless steel pans. Now, everyone goes, oh, I know, I cook with all of that. And so what I tend to do, I still have, I definitely chucked out the non-stick pans. They went out. I use the enamel pans. I think green pan do the enamel coated pans. Glass. I think Lisa was talking about glass, Pyrex. The clay pots, the Le Creuset type things. They tend to be okay. Let me have a look. Pyrex, yeah, I think Pyrex is fine. So Sue's just responding to you trained as releasing toxic emotions, and I assume that that's using the oils as well too, because there's a lot of science coming out about the water. I talked about the water being in this sort of gel-like liquid crystal memory, and water being able to store memory, amazingly, and that being able to be passed down from generation to generation. So really quite important to think about that. So Paula is asking would I be happy to recommend a really effective water filter. And what I tend to say there, Paula, is kind of the sky's the limit on that front. And I have used several actually, and those people that know me know that I use Adit Waters stuff, and I'll write that in the chat. Adit Water stuff. We also have magnets on the mains, because when, as I said, water should be charged, and if you put magnets on your mains, it starts charging that water. It doesn't get rid of the toxins, but it does mean that the toxins are more likely to be flushed out of your body than stay in the water in the body. I really need to do a whole thing on water. I know that it's an important subject. I wanted to just also I've got a few, I don't know if you can see, things that I just picked up from the bathroom. You pick these things up from hotels and stuff like that, and you buy stuff. This is I'm not going to mention the name at all, but I'm just looking at the back for stuff. This is a body lotion, and it's got like more than 20 ingredients. Anything that's got more than 5 ingredients, are hiding to nothing. And then it's like a high level thing, right? Well respected, and it says it's got wheat starch in it. Can you imagine putting wheat onto your system, and you're trying to say avoid grains and stuff, yeah, and then you're putting it on your skin. So that's one. So then we've got a deodorant. Let me find out where the camera is. A deodorant, and sure enough, I mean, I said about the aluminium. That's got aluminium in it as the second thing after water. So that's going to be pretty strong. And I said that, or in women, they've looked at breast milk and found all the stuff that you're sticking onto your arm is in the breast milk. And I spoke to a chap who worked as he works as a scientist who models what happens when you put things on your skin. And he said that most of the stuff ends up in your brain. So, and we know it does. This is where the brain fog comes from and things like that. And again, this is another popular one, which is an underarm thing. And the number of ingredients is just mind-boggling, and that also has aluminium in it as well. If we just look at the stuff we're putting on our bodies itself, then we're going to be making ourselves a bit toxic even from that way. And then you've got oils and affirmations for the releasing toxic emotions. I'll just put that up there so people can see. Works for the limbic system and subconscious trauma memories that can affect and manifest in our bodies as illnesses. Great. So I'm going to Move on. Yeah. So toothpaste is pretty horrendous. And if you look at in there, you're going to see milk in there. So people might be avoiding milk and things like that. You can use coconut oil with some bicarb in it for your teeth. So let's move on. Part 3. Here we go. So let's look at what is the actual mechanism of harm. So we're back to my hierarchy of health, and we've got this toxin layer, and I keep going on about it because I want whenever you think, am I ill, you need to come back to this diagram. What are the toxins in my life, and how they're affecting my gut, and how they're affecting my DNA and who I am. And so when I look at the mechanisms of harm, you've got DNA adduct, which is when the toxin is stuck to the DNA. That's an adduct, and I can measure that on blood tests and see which toxins are actually attached to the DNA. It can be, remember the man boobs, it can be endocrine disruption, either because of usually endocrine disruption is where the chemical behaves as if it is one of the hormones in your body, but not quite, and therefore disrupts things. The toxin can affect the gut itself and ruin the balance of the microbes. And the toxin itself can cause a sensitivity, like an allergy, an intolerance. And so you might find that grains, for example, the body doesn't like that if you eat grains. And it might not be the grain, it might be the mold associated with the grain. And so when we do the diet to detox, we take out any foods that have the toxin in. So it's not, and people say, oh, but that food's good for you, that food's good for you. And what I'm doing is not saying the food is good for you, it's about what toxins are arriving with that food because of this sensitivity happening. And what we have to do is we have to remove the toxin and the food so that the body forgets that it's sensitive to that food, because the sensitivity, that's an immune thing, and it's related to inflammation. Remember that it's this inflammation that causes the disease. It causes the body to be taxed with this deficiency layer. The body's going to start using up all its resources as a result of that inflammation. So these are the mechanisms of action of these toxins. So let's go through a typical story of a typical patient. So patient may come with aches and pains. It's usually aches and pains, fatigue, and maybe IBS type symptoms, gut type symptoms, constipation, that type of thing. Very common. Might be skin as well, sometimes bone issues. And I may do a chemical toxin screen. And this is a particular urine test that I would do. And bromopropane is the parent company of this toxin here is bromopropane, which is likely to come from petrol of some description. And this is the line that tells us how bad the situation is. Green is okay, and then it gets worse as you go up. So this is in the same person, and they then had this styrene. We think of polystyrene. You can see that they are on the high end now with that. We look at organophosphates, which are a type of pesticide, and they are high up on that as well. And this is what we see. It's not just one thing, it's several things. And just because this one is only midway doesn't mean it's not causing any problems. This is another aspect of urine where we're looking at metabolites in urine. It's looking at oxalate metabolites. And oxalate is a normal byproduct of metabolism. We all produce it, but some people produce more than others. Now, this is the normal end, the high end of normal here. And so these here are abnormal.
they're high oxalate levels. Now, oxalates, actually, this is ochratoxin, which is a mold toxin. They were high in this. And what I have to do is construct a story around these results. Now, oxalates come from, we find high oxalates in some children with autism because they get deposited in different places. The eye poking may be because oxalates are deposited in the eyes. They can be deposited in the kidneys. So if the family has a history of kidney stones, that alerts me to the fact that they may be a family who have high normal maybe or higher than normal levels of oxalates, and so they're at risk of oxalate deposition. Fibromyalgia, vulval or perineal pain in any place, because the crystals, the calcium oxalate crystals, will get deposited and make the joints stiff and make the soft tissues stiff. Molds, so this is where this is coming from. Molds, Aspergillus penicillium will produce this toxin, which this person is high in. So molds produce oxalates and they appear in the urine, and I'm then alerted to this fact. But also oxalates are produced by yeast. Yeast and mold similar, aren't they? But yeast like Candida, and the gut you can have an overgrowth of yeast in your gut, not just in the vaginal area. It can be on your scalp, what have you. So the yeast, etc., will produce lots of oxalates as well. So I'm building this story that, okay, is this the gut? This person may have aches and pains. Is this from molds? If they've been living in a moldy building, gives me more information. If they have been having foods that contain oxalates, so beetroot, kale, nuts, these are high in oxalates. You might say, but those foods are good for you. And they are. But they produce oxalates. And if your body's not able to deal with those oxalates, then they're going to be deposited in your tissues. And not only that, in a normal situation, we have lactic acid bacteria. Now, these bugs are eaters of oxalates. So when you've got a good gut going on, good gut, let me move my little head out of the way, microbial pattern going on, then these lactic acid bacteria will gobble up your oxalates. But if you've got gut dysbiosis or leaky gut or something like that, you haven't got any or good amounts of lactic acid bacteria. The oxalate levels are allowed then to accumulate. So it's that happens. It's this balance goes on. This is why you have to sort the gut out. So the mechanism of harm, then it could be the pesticides could be the start of it. Also, what we know about pesticides is that they alter the liver's ability to detoxify other chemicals. So you may have be subject to pesticides, and they then cause a knock-on effect with the other chemicals. It could be the mold, could be the starting point. Being in a moldy building, then creating oxalates deposition, or just crowding out the good bugs in the gut. The mechanism of harm could be that the toxin will attach to the DNA and cause gut dysbiosis. We know that the more of these adducts you have, most people have at least one. But if you're having 2, 3, 4, that kind of thing, plus inflammation, we know that causes more problems than just one of those on their own. So that could be the mechanism of action. And the actual disease that you get, the diagnosis that you get, this purple there, is actually partly determined by, yes, the toxins that you are subject to, but also partly determined by your DNA, by your own genetic makeup. And as I've said before, the depositive oxalates can cause a problem. That's just pain and inflammation in your joints. So those are the sort of myriad different mechanisms of action, but they tend to confine themselves to these first few layers. That's where the action is happening. We often don't feel it until we get to these outer layers, unless you've got some of those gut symptoms. And so with the diet to detox, what we're going to do first of all is to remove the we're going to remove the toxins. We have to remove, put that in there, remove the toxins from the system to stop that sensitivity from happening, because the sensitivity is going, your white cells are going woo, 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 woo all the time, and creating that ongoing inflammation. So you want to calm that whole thing down, and also heal the gut. So there's an overlap between these. Sometimes we have to put them in strict order because some people can't cope doing the two things at a time. But in removing the toxins, you're also healing the gut as well. But in healing the gut, you might be increasing the fermented food that you put into your system. And certain people in this sort of phase 1 can't cope with that. So that's why I kind of separate them, but they're also overlapping. And then on the third part, if you need to, you're doing something active to get rid of those toxins. You might be collating them, you might be doing saunas, a whole list of things that you can do to actively encourage those toxins to come out of your tissues themselves. So I think that is a good place to stop for this section. Great. So how is that making sense? Is it making sense? Because the reason I'm doing this is so that you can basically understand your own health. Remember the Thomas Edison, the doctor of the future will give no medicine. I mean, we need to come to that point where we're understanding our own bodies. Infrared, he's got a question. I think infrared blanket saunas are worth it and work. I do think that infrared, the studies on infrared is useful to get rid of toxins. It works in a particular way in that the toxins come out of the tissues, and rather than going into your gut and being excreted via your gut, or being dealt with through the gut, they go straight into your lymphatics, which then go into the gut and then but then straight out, is the way I understand it. And the beauty of that is that by getting rid of a toxin into your lymphatics, instead of putting it into your bloodstream, you don't suffer so much with that. Because if you put the toxin into your bloodstream, your white cells are there and they're going to start reacting to them, is the way I understand it. It's a gentler way than say heat, high heat. High heat does the same, because if you sweat, then you're likely to get rid of the toxins as well. So that but a lot of people that are very unwell actually can't cope with high heat. And so and it's partly why I go through these 3 phases, because if you need to get your gut in a situation where it can deal with getting rid of toxins. And then later on, if you start doing foot spas and saunas and all those types of things, you won't start having reactions to those. Any other questions on the toxins? Because later on I will go through in a step-by-step manner the diet to detox. I'm just sort of bringing it in bite-sized bits at the moment, because first of all, you've got to understand, what is it making you sick? It's the toxins, and if you can begin to identify
those toxins, not just in the food, but in your environment, then you can begin to do something about your toxic load. Because what we end up doing is dealing with food, but food is just a tiny part of it. It's the whole rest of the spectrum that we are subject to that then creates that inflammatory burden in our systems. So I'm going to go to the last bit now, which is looking a little bit more about the water and intention. For this section, let's go back to Paracelsus and what he said about the mind, the will, the soul, the spirit being able to influence the body and being able to cause or cure a disorder. Some of you would have heard me talk about focused intent and water. It brings us back to water. And this is for some will be again a familiar slide of a study that was done when a glass of water was set up and they measured the electromagnetic field around it, and they asked a number of healers to focus their intention on the water, and they measured, and they did this for a month. And you can see here that this is at the beginning of the experiment. The magnetic field was low, and then as the experiment began, the magnetic field goes up, and it stays up to the end of the experiment when it comes down again. And so they just put this cup of water in a room, and the healers were not near the water. They were all dispersed around the world. They just got email instructions each day telling them to focus their intention on this water. That's telling me that we can change the water. If the water is important because it determines what happens to our cell and whether or not these toxins can take a hold on the cell, then we need to also be turning our focus onto the water and how we can change the water. Here's another experiment that was done ages ago now, looking at the effect of focused intent on DNA. And this is a particular accomplished healer who focused his attention on tumor cells in a Petri dish. And what they found was both intent, so the sort of the thoughts that you had, the intention of your mind, plus imagination, the imagery, the pictures, resulted in changes in the tumor cells. And they also looked at the biofields. So biofields are the electromagnetic fields around the heart and how that can change the DNA. And they did an experiment and they found that heart coherence, so coherence, you can measure the variability in your heart rate. And coherence is when there's a high, for want of a better word, a high frequency going on. And it's heart coherence is when there's a particular sort of, if you like, a feeling of love. So when there's a high heart coherence, a sort of a lovingness, if you like, but there was no intent, so the thoughts weren't particularly going anywhere, there was no change in the DNA structure. However, when there was coherence plus intent, so it was focused on a particular thing, i.e. on the DNA, then the DNA did change. So they're saying that we can get ourselves in this coherent, loving state and focus that energy onto the DNA, and then that will change the DNA. They also found, like the water one, that this happened whether the Petri dish was close at hand or long distances apart between Russia and California, had the same effect. That's what quantum, I guess, is quantum entanglement. And so they conclude in their study that in a state of love, coherence is enhanced and the biofilms around the heart become stronger.
This allows the resonance between the fields of the heart, so the heart fields, the magnetic fields, and the fields around the DNA can come into sync together. The resonance, they resonate together. This process is enhanced by subtle or spiritual energies which resonate with the body due to the toroidal nature of coherent biofilms. Now, when I went to the water conference, they were continually talking about these subtle energies. They talked about 0 point energy. And it basically 0 point energy is free energy that's out there, utilizable by our body, by systems, etc. Dark matter. They talked about all of this stuff, quantum this, and physics that I could barely get my head around. But I believe what they're trying to get at in this paper is that what they're saying is that remember I mentioned that the DNA, this helix, folding of the helix, is to do with the, if you like, the dipole structure of water, the magnetic, if you like, structure of water. It causes that twist. This is just one kind of baseline structure of the DNA, but the DNA can fold itself and operate in this toroidal nature. So toroidal is where the fields, I can never draw it well, where the fields sort of, it's like the iron filings and the magnet, the way that they arrange themselves is a toroidal field. It's not a figure of eight, but I always end up drawing a figure of eight. But when it's in that toroidal sort of structure or configuration, when the DNA is in that, it welcomes in these subtle energies. That's what they're saying. It's connecting, resonating these subtle energies that can enhance the healing process. So such an interaction allows the frequency of the original intention, so your intention has frequency, to manifest as a physical change in the DNA. In this way, our thoughts and intentions can manifest in the body at the biochemical level, bringing about actual physiological changes associated with the healing process. So our thoughts have action. So I've talked about the toxins on one hand, the physical nature of the toxins and the damage that they're doing to our gut, to our DNA, to our water. But we've also got this other tool. We've got intention and love that can have an effect on the toxins as well. And I'll leave you with this quote from William Blake with the way they used to write in those days. It says, "In your bosom you bear your heaven and earth, and all you behold. Though it appears without, it is within, in your imagination, of which this world of mortality is but a shadow." William Blake, I believe, is aligning with some of those ancients, talking about what goes on inside of us, and what goes on inside of us will have an effect on the toxins. And I see when I'm trying to help people with chronic disorders, the toxins, I can identify the toxins on blood tests, etc. But sometimes getting them out is really difficult. And what I find is that our subconscious, the stuff that's going on in sort of those deeper layers of ours, has an important part to play. And unless we deal with that, sometimes we don't get well just dealing with the physical side. And so this is why I like to sort of include some of this stuff, because it seems to be that it's as important as the physical side. Be well. Great. So I hope you've got a balanced view of the two sides, the physical and the intentional side, the internal side. So I'm going to go to some of the comments. And I know Helen has
emailed me to say that she wasn't able to get onto the comments, and I don't know if anyone can help her out with this, particularly for next time. Did anyone have difficulty getting on there? Do you have to have a YouTube account? Is that the issue? If anyone can just shed light on that, and that would be really good, at least for next time. Let's have a look. So how much, Regina's asking, how much good quality water would you recommend to drink per day? Drink if you need to, Regina. This is, I know I'm a doctor and I'm supposed to take 2 liters of water a day, but as a sports doc, there was quite a lot of conversation, let's put it that way, between how much water should you drink per day. And I remember going to a conference where we were talking about marathon runners and some of the East African runners, some of the great East African runners. They did some studies looking at how much they drank in a day, and they were drinking about less than a liter a day, and usually most of that was tea that they were drinking. So all of this thing about drink lots of water and what have you, you can imagine if you're drinking the wrong water as well, your body's going to have to do work to deal with that water. If your water is full of micropollutants and it's not energized, your body's going to have to do work to drink it. Now, this does not mean that you should not drink any water, but drink when you're thirsty is my advice. And also, you replaced half of your daily water with kombucha in the last 20 days, and it's a difficult question to answer. I can't answer, very, very specific questions unless I've got very, very specific. I can answer very specific questions, but it's difficult to tell because I don't know what's in your kombucha, how acidic it is. Acidic kombucha, if it's like vinegar and you're drinking like 5 cups of that, that's going to be tough on the tummy. That's going to be really tough on the tummy. By the same token, if it's very, very sweet kombucha and you're drinking lots of that, that's a lot of sugar to give to your body and to your gut microbes. So I would say moderation with that. We would tend to have maybe 1 or 2 glasses of kombucha a day. Hannah could quite easily drink a whole bottle. Our kombucha is on the sweet side, I would say. So we go with that, and then drink water, and we drink tea as well. Speaking blessing over Sue, I'll just put that one out there. Over the last glass of water, we need to begin to get into this framework of, if you like, addressing our bodies. I think those studies there really are suggesting that our thoughts and our intentions, our heart, are going to have an effect on what goes on in our bodies. We can't ignore it. And the reason we can't ignore it is because we're not going to be able to do so much about all the toxins that are in our environment. Yes, we can pay attention to them, but we're going to go crazy trying to remove them all. But what we can do is pay attention to our thoughts, our intentions, and whether we're concentrating on our heart being in that coherent resonance, the love resonance. So Sue's saying, Helen, if you're listening, at the top right for the chat. Good. So we've been going for a while, guys. It's an hour and 15 I've got on here. Thank you for bearing with me for the technicals at the beginning. Hopefully next week will be better, or the week after. So I'm going to do this 2 weekly, and hopefully when our co sort of presenters come on board, they'll be able to come in between. I will be doing going back to something practical next time. So I'm going to be doing puddings, desserts, and sweet things, but fermented. So we get a break from the highly sort of technical stuff. If you want the slides from today, email me. I can forward those to you as a PDF as well. And any other questions? Thank you, Patrick, for that question there. He's asking, is an MRI scan toxic for us? No, not necessarily. there hasn't been a lot of studies to say that it's bad for you, an MRI scan. Some people, there's been some studies saying some people come out of an MRI scan feeling better. Um, and there are sort of machines that mimic that magnetic pull, but on a sort of a gentler level. Yes, fermented desserts. I'm looking forward to that. So I'm going to be making the famous chocolate mousse for those that have never seen me make that. Some of you have. I'll be doing things like mango, a mango, fermented mango, the berry yogurts. What else? And sake leaves. I'll be using some sake leaves to make maybe sort of a caramelly thing. Yeah, so do join that one. I'll join in on that one. So just waiting for any more questions that you might have. Like the video if you can. I'm not sure whether you can. Yeah, you can go on the thumbs up there on the video. It's an unlisted video. If it will be available after we finish, so you should be able to use the same link and go back and watch it as many times as you like. Obviously, please don't share the links. You know, it didn't cost that much. You can send people to my Eventbrite page or to my website. Under webinars, they can click and it'll take you to the Eventbrite page. Just a word about Eventbrite. Eventbrite doesn't do this thing where for the webinars, it doesn't do this thing where you can just click and get the link unless you're on Zoom, which I'm not going to do. But you have to schedule yourself in to watch a replay, for example. But in fact, what happens is you pay, I get the email, and then I just send you the link back, and you can watch it whenever you like. Not for today's, but if you're just telling your friends to, if you're advising them to come and buy one of the webinars, that's the way to do it. Yeah, they have to go Eventbrite. They have to choose a schedule, but in fact, I'll send them the link and they can just watch it whenever they like. So I think that's it. I'm going to log off. Thank you for that thumbs up, whoever did that. Yes, I'm going to say good night. I'm going to try and see whether the outro works. Thank you, Paula. Thanks. I think it has. Yeah. That's it for now, everyone. Remember, change starts with you.